The call came on a Tuesday morning, right when I was halfway through my second cup of coffee. I remember that detail clearly because I'd just settled into my chair by the window, the one that faces the backyard where my wife used to grow tomatoes, and I was thinking about nothing in particular. Just the birds, just the quiet. The kind of quiet you either make peace with after 63 years, or you don't. My daughter's number lit up the screen. She sounded rushed, the way she always does when she needs something but doesn't want to admit it right away. We talked for a minute about nothing. How was I feeling? Was my knee still bothering me? Had I watched the game? And then she got to the reason she called. Her husband needed to fly to Phoenix for work, some kind of audit situation at his company's regional office. He'd be gone for 10 days, maybe 12. She had a work conference in Denver that had been on the calendar for months, the kind she couldn't cancel without consequences. And their sons, my grandson, 8 years old, 3rd grade, would need somewhere to be. "Dad, would you mind having Theo?" I stopped her right there. "Put him on a bus. I'll pick him up at the station." I was already looking forward to it. My grandson and I get along the way some people just do. No effort, no performance. He likes baseball cards and strawberry ice cream and asking questions about things I don't know the answers to. He makes me feel like I'm useful again. My son-in-law dropped him off on a Friday evening, pulled into my driveway, helped carry a duffel bag to the porch, shook my hand the way he always does. Firm, 2 seconds, done. He kissed my grandson on the top of his head and said he'd call every night. Then he drove away. I brought my grandson inside, showed him the room I'd made up for him. Fresh sheets, the old lamp with the baseball stitching on the shade that had been in this house since my own kids were small. I asked him if he wanted dinner. I'd made a pot of chicken soup that afternoon because I knew he liked it. He stood in the kitchen doorway and didn't say anything. I thought he was tired from the drive. "You hungry?" I asked. He looked at the pot on the stove, then looked at me, then back at the pot, and then he said very quietly, "Is it okay if I eat?" I put down the ladle. I turned around slowly. He was standing there with his hands at his sides, his backpack still on, his eyes doing something I didn't have a name for right away. It took me a moment to recognize it because it's not something you expect to see on a child's face. It was fear, not the normal kind. Not the kind kids have before a dentist appointment or a thunderstorm. This was the kind of fear that comes from having learned, over time, that the wrong answer gets punished. "Of course it's okay," I said. "It's dinner time. Why wouldn't it be?" He didn't answer. He just sat down at the table and waited with his hands folded in his lap, watching me until I put the bowl in front of him. And then he ate slowly, carefully, like he was trying not to draw attention to himself. I sat across from him and pretended to read the newspaper, but I wasn't reading anything. That night, after I thought he'd gone to bed, I walked past the guest room and the door was cracked open. I could see the bed, the one I'd made up with clean sheets and a pillow from the closet, empty. My grandson was asleep on the floor. He'd taken the pillow off the bed and put it on the hardwood, and he was curled up on top of his jacket with his knees pulled to his chest. I stood there in the hall for a long time. In the morning, I asked him, as casually as I could, whether the bed had been uncomfortable. He said no. I asked why he'd slept on the floor. He shrugged the way kids do when they're hiding something they don't have the words for. "It's okay," he said. "I'm used to it. 8 years old, used to sleeping on the floor." I didn't push it that first morning. I made eggs and toast and put them on the table and told him to eat as much as he wanted. He ate 2 helpings and looked at me after the second one like he was waiting for a reaction. I just refilled my coffee and asked him if he wanted to go to the park later. We went to the park. We fed the ducks. He laughed at something, and for about 45 minutes, he seemed like a completely normal 8-year-old boy, and I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then we came home, and I told him to go wash his hands before lunch, and I heard him in the bathroom asking himself, not me, himself out loud, in a voice so small I had to hold my breath to hear it. "Is that okay? Is that okay to do?" I sat down on the couch and stared at the floor. Over the next 3 days, I noticed things I couldn't unfold back up once I'd seen them. He flinched when I reached past him to get something off a shelf. He ate every meal quickly, methodically, never leaving anything on the plate, watching the door the whole time. He apologized constantly for sneezing, for laughing too loud, for dropping a fork. When I raised my voice slightly because I was calling to him from the next room, he came running with his shoulders up around his ears. He never asked for anything. Not once in 3 days did that boy ask for a glass of water, a snack, permission to turn on the television. He waited to be offered. He waited to be told. I've been around a long time. I worked 30 years as a middle school shop teacher. I've seen kids from hard homes. I know what certain kinds of silence look like. On the 4th day, I sat him down at the kitchen table after breakfast, and I just talked to him. Told him about when I was his age, about the neighborhood I grew up in, about the time I broke my arm falling out of a tree, and my father drove me to the hospital without saying a single word the whole way. Not because he was angry, but because that was just how he was. I told him some of it was funny now, looking back. He listened with his chin in his hands. Then, without me asking, he said, "My dad doesn't let me eat when I'm in trouble." I kept my face very still. "How often are you in trouble?" I asked. He thought about it. "A lot," he said. "What do you do that gets you in trouble?" He frowned. "I don't know. Sometimes I don't know what I did." I asked him if he wanted to tell me anything else. He was quiet for a while, looking at his hands. Then he told me about the room. His room at home, that there was no furniture in it. No bed, no dresser, no lamp, just the floor and a window. He'd been sleeping on the floor since 1st grade. He thought maybe he'd done something back then that was bad enough to lose his bed, but he couldn't remember what. I had to get up and go stand at the kitchen window for a minute. I called my daughter that afternoon when my grandson was in the backyard kicking a soccer ball. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail that didn't say much. Just that I wanted to talk, that I had some questions about how things were at home. She called back 2 hours later. I told her what her son had told me, and I told her what I'd seen. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Dad, it's not as bad as it sounds. He exaggerates." I asked her about the room with no furniture. She said her husband thought structure was important. She said her son had a tendency to act out, and that they'd tried everything. She said it in the voice people use when they've said the same things to themselves so many times they've stopped hearing them. "A bed isn't a privilege," I said. "It's a bed." She asked me not to interfere. She said her husband was already stressed about the work trip and that this wasn't a good time to start something. She said they'd talk when she got back from Denver. I told her I loved her and hung up. That night, I called my friend Samuel Reed. We've known each other 40 years. He was a social worker before he retired, and I told him everything. He didn't say much while I talked. When I finished, he said, "You have to report this. You know you have to report this." I knew. I called Child Protective Services the next morning. I explained what I'd observed, gave my name and address, answered every question they asked. The woman on the phone was thorough and calm and took everything down. She told me a caseworker would follow up within 48 hours. While I was waiting, something else happened that I wasn't expecting. My son-in-law called from Phoenix that evening, which was unusual. He'd been calling every other day, short calls, nothing much. But this time he asked to talk to his son, and after they'd spoken for a few minutes, he asked to talk to me. He said he'd heard from my daughter that I'd asked some questions. His voice had an edge to it. "I just want to make sure we're all on the same page," he said. I told him I'd made a report to CPS. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that I counted to 7 in my head. Then he said, "You had no right to do that." I said, "He's 8 years old. He sleeps on the floor. He asks permission to eat. I had every right." He told me I'd overstepped. He said my grandson was a difficult kid and I didn't understand the full picture. He said he was going to cut the trip short and come home early to deal with the situation. He used the words, "deal with the situation," exactly. "He's staying here," I said, "until this is sorted out." He hung up. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't scared. I'm 63 years old, I live alone, and I just told my son-in-law he couldn't have his son back. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off for a while. Then I got up, locked the front door, and went to check on my grandson. He was asleep in the bed this time. I'd moved his pillow back up and turned on the nightstand lamp and told him the floor was for daytime if he wanted, but the bed was where people slept in this house. He'd looked at me for a moment like he was trying to figure out if there was a catch. "No catch," I said, "just sleep." He was out in 10 minutes. The CPS caseworker came 2 days later. She was a young woman, organized and professional, and she spent about an hour at the house. She spoke with my grandson privately for a while in the living room while I stayed in the kitchen. I don't know exactly what he told her, but when she came out, she asked me several detailed questions and told me the case had been upgraded to a priority investigation. My son-in-law came back from Phoenix early. He showed up at my door on a Thursday afternoon and I opened it and we stood there looking at each other through the screen. I didn't open the screen door. He told me I'd destroyed his family. He said my daughter was devastated. He said the CPS investigation was based on the imagination of an 8-year-old who didn't know the difference between discipline and abuse. He said a lot of things. I let him talk. Then I said, "When's the last time he had a bed to sleep in?" He didn't answer that. "When's the last time he ate 3 meals in a day without earning it first?" Still nothing. "He's 8, I said. "Whatever you think you're teaching him, that's not what he's learning." He left. The investigation took several weeks. My daughter flew home from Denver early and we had the hardest conversation I've ever had with her in her life. She cried for a long time. She said she hadn't understood how bad it had gotten. She said it had been so gradual that she'd stopped being able to see it clearly. I believed her. I also believed that belief doesn't erase responsibility. What came out during the investigation was worse than what I'd known. The school had flagged concerns twice. My grandson had come in hungry, had fallen asleep in class, had reported at one point that he didn't always have dinner. The notes had been filed. A call had been made to CPS the previous year, but it had been closed without a home visit. Nobody had pushed hard enough. My son-in-law had been under serious financial pressure for almost 2 years. He'd lost a significant amount of money on some bad decisions, investments that hadn't worked out, debts he'd kept from my daughter. He was angry all the time, and he'd turned that anger into control, and the person with the least power in the house was the one who absorbed the most of it. None of that excused it, but I've lived long enough to know that understanding why something happened and forgiving it are two very different things, and neither one of them is a requirement of the other. The court issued a temporary protective order. My son-in-law moved out of the family home. My grandson stayed with me for the duration of the proceedings, 11 weeks in total. And somewhere around week 4, he stopped flinching when I reached past him for things. And somewhere around week 7, he started asking me if there was more when he wanted seconds. And somewhere around week 9, he climbed up next to me on the couch while I was watching a game and fell asleep with his head on my arm. That was the moment I knew we were going to be all right. The family court judge was a woman in her late 50s who had clearly seen everything and was not impressed by anything. She asked my grandson directly in chambers where he wanted to live. My daughter was there, my son-in-law was there with his attorney. I wasn't in the room for that part, but my daughter told me later that he'd said without any hesitation that he wanted to stay with his grandpa. She cried when she told me that. So did I, if I'm being honest. The judge awarded temporary custody to me with supervised visitation for my son-in-law, contingent on completing a parenting program and anger management counseling. My daughter retained her parental rights with conditions. Regular check-ins, a family therapist, a support network that didn't just consist of her husband. The court also ordered my son-in-law to pay child support, enforceable and documented going forward. That part mattered. It mattered to me, and I think it mattered to my grandson in a way he couldn't fully articulate yet. That someone in authority had looked at the situation and said plainly, "This child's needs are not negotiable, and someone is going to be accountable for meeting them." My daughter and I are still working through things. It's not simple. She loves her son, I know that, and I know she's ashamed in ways she hasn't been able to put into words yet. We talk on the phone most evenings. We're building something back, slowly. There's no shortcut for it. My son-in-law is in counseling. I don't know what will happen with that. I've learned at my age that I can't fix everything and I shouldn't try. What I can do is make sure the boy in the next bedroom eats breakfast in the morning and sleeps in an actual bed at night and knows that some people are safe to ask things of. That's where we are now. My grandson turned 9 last month. We had a small party, just a few of his friends from the school nearby, some cake, a baseball game on in the background. He got a new glove and a book about the solar system, and a card from his mother with a long letter inside that he read privately in his room and came out afterward with red eyes and said nothing about, which I respected. At the end of the night, after everyone had gone home and I was washing the dishes, he came and stood next to me at the sink. "Grandpa," he said. "Yeah. Thanks for the party." "Of course." He was quiet for a second. Then, "Thanks for the other stuff, too." I kept washing dishes. "That's what I'm here for," I said. He went to bed. I finished the dishes. I turned off the kitchen light and stood there in the dark for a minute, the way I sometimes do, thinking about my wife, thinking about all the years, thinking about the strange and specific ways that love asks things of you when you've stopped expecting to be asked. Then I went to check that the door was locked and I went to bed myself.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. I truly appreciate your comments, feedback, and thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. See you again in the next stories.